It's time to talk about Fire Emblem Engage classes. Now, this list might look confusing because there are class names and names of characters, but just know that the names of the characters refers to their unique class. So I'm going to make sure I don't make the mistake of just being like Ivy is like so-and-so as a unit. So we're really talking about like LINDWURM, SLEIPNIR, and Divine Dragon, and so on. All right, and then the actual classes are here too. So what I want to go over are the base. So if I say bases buffs, for uniques, it's going to be a buff to the bases of that class, not the unit itself, so that the class in question can accomplish something or be relevant. For growths buffs, it's the same thing. It's like growths modifier. So for example, Berserker gives you more build, like the most build growth of any of the units, right? So that's like a growth modifier. Okay, and then huge buff is a combination of the two, and then a rework or a nerf. This could be like reworking a mechanic, changing a mechanic, or nerfing a thing. I don't really think anything is going to be nerfed here. I don't think anything's like clearly overpowered. So a lot of things will probably be the rework aspect of this, like maybe Berserker's passive is reworked to be useful. We'll see. All right, so let's start with Ivy's base class. So LINDWURM, right? We're really thinking about like her promoted class, right? LINDWURM. Okay, so LINDWURM I do think is in a good spot. Ivy has low accuracy. She's pretty slow. She has low luck, so she's crit. So she has like some downsides for the huge advantage of being a tome flyer staff bot with decent bulk. And she's usually made into a hard carry on multiple different styles of play, like LTC, efficiency, even just general play. She can easily be made into a hard carry with minimal effort. So you could argue she's a little overpowered, but I feel like her downsides are pretty noticeable when she doesn't have the things that fix those downsides. So I think she's in a good spot right now. Hortensia, I think, is similar. So Hort is almost like the opposite of Ivy, where she has less health. She has less defense, but she's much faster, much more accurate. She can't use as heavy tomes that have as good of damage. Like, she doesn't have A-rank tomes on this class, on SLEIPNIR, but it's essentially the best staff bot in the game, like the best staff bot class in the game, balanced by being fragile. You can get this class to kill. Usually you need to give some kind of effective weapon, like Corrupted Effective, for example, like the Celica tome. But outside of that, you can double in one round certain enemies if you get the might on the tomes high enough. But generally, it's like one of the best staff bot classes, so I think it's in a really good spot. Divine Dragon, I feel like it needs reworked. I don't think it ever gets, like, its bases aren't really that good. Its growth modifier, like, it's just like average bases, average growth modifiers. The Divine Dragon effect, I guess like the best use case is maybe like Dragon Instruct. The Dragon Dance and Dragon Instruct, but even then, like, you're basically just like a utility. It's also a weird class because it doesn't have high rank in arts, even though it has arts. So I'm pretty sure I can't use Flashing Fist, which is really awkward considering it's like one of the main things it can do. And it just is lacking in stats. So I think it needs like completely reworked. It's beyond a huge buff. It needs like completely redone. The next class we have is AVENIR. AVENIR, I think, needs huge buffs. I think Alfred's big issue, he has a lot of issues, but he doesn't really have like a niche to fill. He's not tanky enough to main tank very well at base. Like, there are better main tanks than him for sure, even with nothing equipped. His damage is kind of low. His accuracy is kind of low. His speed is average, but average speed in Fire Emblem is slow. You're either fast and doubling or you're not. So he's not fast and doubling on this class. So it just generally has like low damage, kind of lowish build. It doesn't really have much going on for it. I think it just needs huge buffs. Next we have the Tour d'Elite class, Alchrist. I think this needs maybe growth buffs. I feel like he starts off really good in his base class. He does meaningful damage. He can one-round flyers with minimal help. But I feel like as you approach endgame, it gets tricky. Relying on procs can be unreliable because his procs, when they do occur, they're not as damaging as like a sandstorm. So like you could get 2 procs and still not kill something. You still have to have pretty good base damage. So I feel like maybe some growth buffs so that as he levels, he gets a little bit stronger. But beyond that, I think he's largely fine. Saline, I think, is in a situation, VIDAME, I would buff its bases. I would give her a little bit more defense and res, a little bit more speed, and that's it. Just make her a little bit tankier and a little bit faster. I feel like she should be like her versus Citrine in terms of if you want to bring one or the other. Saline should be more of like an off-tanky utility, and Citrine should be more of a damage utility in terms of like the early mages. So that way she has more of a use case. She still is kind of this, but she's not really that much tankier than Citrine, so I would just make her a little bit more faster, a little bit more tanky on this class, on VIDAME specifically. Picket, I think, is perfectly fine. Even immediately, I know a lot of people think it's slow, but she just joins the Silver Lance, so she seems slower than she is. But if you hand her a Steel Lance, Fencelar, she'll do fine. Immediately double and one round a lot of enemies on her join map. And that's when she's not even on Picket. She's on her, like, whatever, Sentinel class or whatever the hell. So I think Picket's in a good spot. Successor, I would buff the growths. I feel like the bases are largely fine. I also would like to increase the cap on its dex. I feel like that holds it back. That might fall under rework. I guess we rework it. I would increase its dex cap. I would give it a little bit better defensive bases and a little bit like better growths to emphasize a kind of like main tank role that can actually land attacks. The big issue with Diamant is hitting things. Even with like engravings, he has a hard time. So he can be a decent tank, don't get me wrong, but I would still buff his successor class. It can self-heal, and the higher the dex, the more chance it self-heals. And it can heal on enemy phase too, which is interesting, but it is random, so if you're counting on a heal and you don't get it, you can easily die. And Ike tanks and Avoid tanks and Bonded Shield are just still better. Let's talk about Vale's class, Fellchild. So Fellchild, I feel like is bad. Vale has really good bases and growths, so she switches to another class, and those classes have higher bases than Fellchild, so you throw her on like Chicken Knight, you throw her on Mage Knight, she's popping off immediately, but I feel like her base class doesn't bring anything to the table to justify using it over those classes, so I really see no reason to keep her on it. The unique of gaining additional like emblem charge is fine, but you can just attack and kill things and get charge either way, so it doesn't really help that much. It's kind of nice, I guess, but it's not like dragon emblems, like dragon effects are so good that she's going to be spamming these huge crazy effects all the time. So usually you want to second seal her, honestly, and then she's good to go. And then finally for unique classes we have Cupido. Cupido is basically like a Mage Knight that has bow access, kind of. It's like kind of physical, kind of magical. I would buff the bases on it a little bit. I feel like it is a little weak, but it's not bad. It does have good speed. It has okay build. I would buff like the base magic slightly, and because like his magic growth isn't good, so Anna's still going to be the best Radiant Bow user, but he'll be more competitive, and maybe give him some more stats. I don't really know where, but it just feels lacking in terms of just raw damage output. Next we have Berserker. Berserker, I would keep the stats the same. I would increase the dex cap a little bit, and I would change its passive to be something better. I don't really know what the passive should be changed to, but specifically giving you 2 moved tiles when you slap something with a great weapon is really not the best thing. If it gave like a damage bonus to using great weapons, that would be interesting, because then Berserker would be objectively like the hardest hitting thing in the game, and Warrior would be like a more flexible version that's probably a little bit faster and better at doubling, and also has bow access, so it has like the 3 range backup, it can shoot down flyers, and then Berserker just runs up to things with worse accuracy and just smacks them with a huge weapon. I feel like that would be cool. Maybe gets like 20% bonus damage to using great weapons. Be a little interesting. It might be, I don't know that it'd be overpowered, because you still get hit when you attack, which is bad and annoying. And Berserker's not a tank, so I think that would be fine. But some kind of rework to its passive, maybe a little bit more of an increase to dex cap, because those endgame enemies are pretty hard to hit. Bow Knight, I guess like a slight growth base or growth buff. Largely, it's fine. I don't really know. It's not bad. Like, it's not... I don't consider it to be good. I think it's just decent. It's not like an S tier class or an A tier class. I feel like it's like a B tier class, maybe a C. It has like the bow access to it. There's so many ways to pull a bow off of a unit. Like if you're on Lucina, you can pull out Parthia. If you're on Lin, you have access to bows. There's a lot of emblems that just give you bow access, so this is not as big of an advantage as it seems. And a lot of bow enemies, or a lot of flying enemies, don't need bows to be killed. Wyverns, you don't need to kill them with bows. There's like Worm Slayer, there's wind magic, you can just double them with magic, you can double them with most weapons and kill them. So I feel like this largely helps kill Griffin Knights, and I feel like it needs a little bit more in terms of growth. It does have good growths though, but maybe some more strength growth or something. Something to give it some more of an edge. I can't really say how or what specifically, but it needs some kind of advantage. General, I would buff its bases a little bit. It's weird because Great Knight and General, like Great Knight has slightly lower stats. I feel like General should have much higher defense and a little bit more res than it does. So it should still be less res than other classes, but the res thing, especially when if you're a unit that gets doubled, it's just such a death sentence. It just makes a unit almost unable to run the class. So I feel like maybe just slightly, a few more, like 2 more points of res or something. Maybe another point or 2 of defense and another point or 2 of strength to differentiate it from the Great Knight more. Because Great Knight is almost, it's like similar stats, which I also do think Great Knight needs a little bit of a buff, but maybe slightly higher like speed, slightly higher res, so that General has like more defense and strength, and Great Knight has more mobility. It's still worse res than a Paladin, but it's better res than a General. And, you know, worse speed than a Paladin, but much better speed than a General, so to kind of differentiate them. This should be much tankier. This should be, like, if you're trading tanking for mobility, you need more health. Also, maybe more health on the General, more base health. Griffin Knight, I think, is perfectly balanced. It's high speed, but low damage. Staff bot utility. You can one round on it, but you need units with, like, high strength or high magic to kill. So it feels pretty fair. It's weak to flyers, has low physical defense, can easily be killed by different things and attacked and damaged, and it has like a high skill for playing this class, I would say, for certain ones for sure, if you're like positioning it correctly. Halberdier, I would give it a bases buff. I would just buff its strength and its dex. That's it. That's all I would do to it, because a lot of the units that want to be on this class want to double and kill off of that doubling, so a little bit more damage, and they want to hit, so a little bit more dex. That's it. That's all I would change. I think its pincer attack is pretty interesting, and if you play around it with cancer units, it can be really strong. Obviously, if you do play in this way, you have to get used to committing, which is hard for a lot of people to play around. Basically, you need units who can get into the fray and stay and not die, and building those units in of itself requires a lot of game knowledge and, like, you know, specific XP funneling and stuff like this. Maybe some stat boosters and resources like emblem rings. But it could, in theory, especially with a buff, be pretty strong. Hero, I think, is in a good spot. If it's at max HP, you get 2 chain attacks. It has 2 weapons. It has decent bases. Gold Mary Hero with speed fixing is decent. I think that's really the obvious example. There are other units who can be Hero. I haven't really tried a Kagetsu Hero, but in theory, he could do it well. High Priest, I think, needs huge buffs. It's kind of like the worst of everything. It's like a bad Martial Master and a bad Sage rolled into one class. It has bad Tome access. It has Art access, but no Chain Guard. I would just, actually, let's put it in rework. I would just give it Chain Guard, and now it's good. That's all I would do to it. Just give it Chain Guard. Maybe even get rid of Arts. Who cares? Just get rid of Arts. Arts don't matter. Just give it Chain Guard, and now you have a weak Sage who can Chain Guard, which is interesting. It's a niche. It's something different. I would also maybe just make it Tomes. Well, I guess if we make it Tomes and Fists, it's no longer a support. Maybe that's what it should be, though. But I guess it's High Priest, so it has to be, like, supportive, right? But I guess, like, Tomes, Fist. But the Fist thing, like, do you ever punch things on a High Priest? I feel like that's the big issue with it, is that it can punch things, but it's a bad idea to do so. So if it does equip Fists, it usually equips, like, Shielding Art, which is weird. It's just such a weird concept. I don't like it. I feel like it needs some changes to make it stand out from Sage and Martial Master, which are significantly better classes. But it's hard to be like, oh, well, if we remove Arts, then it's basically just a Sage that can Chain Guard, which maybe that's what it does. Like, worse Tomes, but it can Chain Guard, so then it doesn't punch things. well, it does say High Priest, and High Priest doesn't really imply that it can punch things. So maybe it's like it can chain guard, it has tome access and staff access, but its tome access is worse than Sage, and its bases and magic and speed are worse than Sage. So Sage has better speed and damage and better tomes and a better passive, and then High Priest can just do, you know, something in between a Martial Master and a Sage. I think that'd be fine. Mage Knight is perfectly fine. I don't see anything wrong with it. It's basically balanced by the fact that it's landlocked because there are flying things that can do what Mage Knight can do. It's basically a Griffin that can use tomes on the ground. That's kind of how I view it. Martial Master, I think, is perfectly fine. I wouldn't change anything. Paladin, I would rework to have 2 weapons. It's really awkward that it's 1 only. Its bases are similar to like a hero, so it's like I'd rather just have a hero or a warrior, because then I can do chain attacks, and chain attacks are like really good. You know, I can just I can have a unit A kill an enemy and then sit next to 2 enemies, and then units B, C, D, E, whatever, if they attack those other 2 enemies, just get bonus damage. That's massive value. And Paladin's big issue is that it's locked to a single weapon, and it has just average stats. That's it. It needs a second weapon, and then it would be good, because then it could flex into breaking, it could run different things, it'd be more flexible. And I think it does have a good passive too. It's like a utility passive, which is interesting, but it just needs more. Royal Knight, I would buff the bases on Royal Knight. The issue with Royal Knight right now is that it has almost exactly the same stats as Griffin Knight. And Griffin Knight is really good, but Griffin Knight can fly and doesn't have Reforge. Reforge is interesting because what it does is if a unit gets broken, the Reforger, the Royal Knight, loses 10 health and fixes that unit, like unbreaks them, so that the next attacker, assuming they don't get broken again, can now be enemy phased. So there is utility there, but the fact that it usually happens when you don't want it to, like you have to be careful of the positioning of the Royal Knight, because if you reforge too much, the Royal Knight can die, and its bulk is quite bad. I think the easiest thing to do to it is to change reforge so that it just works once per enemy phase, costs no health, and then give the Royal Knight a little bit more HP, a little bit more defense, and a little bit more res. And maybe make it slightly slower by like 1 or 2 points. So Griffin Knight is the faster variant of Royal Knight that's, you know, can flex into 11 sword or different weapon types. It has flying, but it has strictly worse bulk. So Royal Knight is a tankier Griffin Knight on the ground that can fix 1 person's break for free per enemy phase, and that's it. So it'd be like once per turn type of thing. So that way you don't lose health, and that way you have some off tanking. I feel like it needs to have similar bulk to like a Paladin, and then it would be really good. Sage, I think, is in a great spot. A lot of good builds. Just throw, you know, Thoron on a Sage, give it a staff. It's immediately useful. It doesn't even matter what unit it is. It could even be like a unit that's not even a mage, and they'll still do stuff. You just spam obstruct, and they'll still contribute. But Sage is really strong. Doesn't need anything. Dancer's really strong. Doesn't need anything. Sniper needs huge buffs. The issue with Sniper is that covert that cannot enemy phase sucks, because the big advantage of being a covert is that you're a dodge tank, and dodge tanks want to enemy phase so that they can attack things and not get hit. So if you're sitting in a tree and an enemy runs up to you in 1 range and misses you and then you do nothing, that's useless. So the big issue with Sniper is that it's a covert for no reason. Honestly, I think it needs reworked. I would make it so that they have +1 range, and I would make them a backup. I don't think they should be a covert. Honestly, well, then we have no coverts. Well, we could do it this way. +1 range and keep it a covert. The +1 range would make it unique, because now it can attack things really far away. So it has, like, it's a sniper. What does a sniper do? It attacks things far away. That's the most logical thing to do, in my opinion. So keep its bases the same, so then it's not like a stat freak, like it doesn't have crazy stats. Its stats compared to other classes, quite mediocre or average-ish, nothing, kind of similar to most things. So if you want to keep it a covert, just give it +1 range. That's the easiest thing to do. That's all I would do to it, and that would make it much better. It wouldn't make it overpowered, because it's a player phase archer, you know, like how much, it's not going to be enemy phasing maps, you know. It'll just be like a mini siege thing that's kind of neat. And then if you put Claude Ring on it, it'd be pretty hilarious. Swordmaster, I would buff... How do we buff it? Does it need buffed? Kagetsu on Swordmaster is good, but Kagetsu is just insane. Other units on Swordmaster are quite bad. So if we buff We could do a base buff. I would make it faster. I would give it, what would I do? So the big thing with like backups is that they need to have an edge, or like ground footlocked units. Like if you can fly over terrain. You usually have 6 move. So if you're on the ground, you should probably have better stats than other things that aren't. So like you're trading movement for stats or mobility, like flying for stats. So I feel like Swordmaster could have some interesting things, like maybe some things added to it. Actually, I'm gonna put it in a rework. Let's come up with some ideas here. So run through is actually really good when paired with a Halberdier, because the Swordmaster, especially if it has canter, can run through a wall of enemies and then canter behind something so the Halberdier can double in 1 round, usually. But the issue is Kagetsu Swordmaster can pull this off. To some degree, Lapis can kind of, if you give her a crit build. I think the big issue with Swordmaster is that it needs base crit. I think that's all I would change. I would rework it so that it has high base crit, because that's usually what Swordmasters do anyways. So that way when it's running through, it's critting more often, and also maybe give it a little bit more speed so it's even faster, which, you know, enemy Swordmasters would also be faster, but they already are fast, so it's like whatever. You could do that, or even just give it more base crit. I think that would be nice. But overall, it's like a decent-ish class. Thief I feel like is largely fine. I think Thief is fine. It's balanced by its low damage. It's really easy to make it an avoid tank that's hard to hit, and it's kind of balanced by the fact that daggers can't really deal with armor very well, and they can't deal with high defense enemies very well. They also lack 3 range, which is fine. It's because it's a 1 to 2 range weapon that poisons. Like, how much more do you need, you know? It's like so good already. I think Thief is in a good spot. I think Yunaka and Zelkov are both decent. They can kind of run broken builds to some degree. Those are like the main thieves usually. I haven't tried a Kagetsu Thief before, but I'm sure it would be strong. I have tried, I think, Panette Thief, and it was okay. I think she was too slow to double. So you need someone with like kind of good strength and kind of good speed to double, as is the case with most of these classes. Warrior is definitely one of the best classes, so it doesn't need anything. Bow, it's a backup that can 1, 2, and 3 range. It can 2 to 3 range on longbow, 1 to 2 range on like a tomahawk. It can, you know, brave axe, it can great axe, it can crit, it can do so many different things. Several units are really strong on warrior. It's just a really good class. It doesn't need anything. It also has a really good passive that if an enemy's broken, you deal 50% more damage, which is insane. Especially if you use, like, you can use Fracture. You can have a unit like Fracture, like a worm or something, and now your warrior is doing crazy damage with no counterattack. Wolf Knight. I think Wolf Knight's in a good spot too. Good mobility, good passive. Reducing enemy movement protects your weak units who you don't want to get attacked. So controlling enemies, poison, can flex into other weapons. It has access to secondary weapon. Even if it just had daggers, I would still put this in like perfect. It doesn't even need... The fact that it can get them though is crazy. Like you can run swords, axes, lances. All of those are good weapon types depending on the units and the use case. And they all have access to, like, you know, getting through armor, like Wormslayer, Rider's Bane, all this stuff. So like it solves the thieves issue of dealing with heavy defense. You can just run like Armor Slayer and you're good to go. Just like immediately chop through a dude's armor and you're fine. Wyvern Knight I also think is good. I wouldn't change anything. A little bit slower than Griffin, but higher defense and higher strength. And higher strength and defense growth as well, and a little bit more health. So these are kind of like, this is more utility oriented, but it can still do combat well. This is more combat oriented. And then compared to the other flyers, like these are kind of like the same story, where like this is more damage oriented, this is more utility support oriented. So I feel like overall the metagame is in a good spot where most of the classes, I wouldn't even touch at all with balancing. I would say they're fine. And a huge secondary amount of them are good as well. Like I would say overall, most of the classes are really strong. And the ones that are, you know, kind of subpar, like you could argue like the dragon classes have some use cases in certain team comps, and that's fair. But they're definitely not as strong as like these. Like if you throw Veil on Chicken Knight, she's just popping off. She joins at 2500 SP. So she's a better Griffin than she is a thing, you know. You can throw Marth on her because Marth is free. You know, everyone else on your team probably has Emblem. She has 2500 SP, you can get her sword power 2, speed +3, and she's doubling and one rounding and contributing immediately. So a lot of these things are just lackluster, like missing something. Definitely drop a comment as to what you think things should be changed to, what you think is overpowered or underpowered. I don't really think anything needs nerfed here. I do think Ivy and Hort, even though they're unique and crazy as hell, like still have obvious downsides that you can't ignore. So I do think that largely the game is pretty balanced, actually, which is a good thing. This is like, you know, there's a reason why I have like, I think 3K hours in this game at this point. All right, peace.